Robert Service. He wrote the most commercially successful poetry of the 20th century, yet his most popular works were considered doggerel by the literary set. Service didn't care. He made a fortune. And as he said, verse, not poetry, was what I was after, something the man in the street would take notice of and the sweet old lady would paste in her album, something the schoolboy would spout and the fellow in the pub would quote. Okay, I know the world doesn't need yet another rendition of the Shooting of Dan McGrew, but I have a soft spot for this recitation. Why? Because it was the party piece of my Uncle Ned. It was also the party piece of Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney. But I want to do this for my relations who, like me, have a soft spot for not just the recitation, but for Uncle Ned, who invariably would be cajoled and bullied into reciting this after he'd enjoyed a few pints. So he'd shut his eyes in concentration, and then, as my mother would say, if he didn't knock it down, he staggered it. So, a bunch of the boys were whooping it up in the Malamute saloon, and the kid that handled the music box was hitting a jagtime tune. And back at the bar in a solo game sat dangerous Dan McGrew, and watching his luck was his light of love, the lady that's known as Lou. When out of the night that was 50 below and into the din and the glare, there came a miner, fresh from the creeks, dog dirty and loaded for bear. He looked like a man with one foot in the grave and scarcely the strength of a louse, but he tilted his poke of dust on the bar and called for drinks on the house. There was none could place the stranger's face, though we searched ourselves for a clue, but we drank his health, and the last to drink was dangerous Dan McGrew. There's men who somehow grab your eyes and hold them hard like a spell, and such was he, and he seemed to me like a man who had lived in hell, with a face most hair and a dreary stare like a dog whose day is done. But he watered the green stuff in his glass, and the drops fell one by one. And I got to wondering who he was and figuring what he'd do, and then I turned my head, and there, watching him, was the lady that's known as Lou. His eyes went rubbering around the room, and he seemed in a kind of a daze, till at last that old piano fell in the way of his wandering gaze. The ragtime kid was taking a drink. There was no one else on the stool, so the stranger stumbled across the floor, and he flopped down like a fool. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt, he sat, and I saw him sway. Then he grabbed the keys with his talon hands. By God, but that man could play. Were you ever out in the great alone, when the moon is awful clear, and the icy mountains hemmed you in, with a silence you almost could hear, with only the cry of the timber wolf, and you camped there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark, dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold. While high overhead, green, yellow and red, the north lights swept in bars. Then you've a hunch what the music meant. Hunger, night and the stars. And not a hunger of the belly kind that can be banished with bacon and beans, but the gnawing hunger of lonely men for a home and all that it means. For a fireside far from the cares that are, 4 walls and a roof above, and oh so cramful of cosy joy, and crowned by a woman's love. A woman dearer than all the world, and true as heaven is true. By God, how gruesome she looks through her rouge, the lady that's known as Lou. Then, of a sudden, the music changed, so soft you scarce could hear, but you felt your life had been looted clean of all it once held dear, that someone had stolen the woman you loved, that her love was the devil's lie, that your guts were gone and the best for you was to crawl away and die. 'Twas the crowning cry of a heart's despair, and it thrilled you through and through. I guess I'll make it a spread misere, said Dangerous Dan McGrew. The music almost died away, then it burst like a pent-up flood, and it seemed to say, repay, repay, and my eyes were blind with blood. And the thought came back of an ancient wrong, and it thrilled like a frozen lash, and the lust awoke to kill, to kill. Then the music died with a crash. And the stranger turned, and his eyes they burned in a most peculiar way, in a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt. He stood, and I saw him sway. Then his lips went in a kind of a grin, and he spoke, and his voice was calm. And boys, says he, you don't know me, and none of you care a damn, but I want to state, and my words are straight, and I bet my poke they're true, that one of you is a hound of hell, and that one is Dan McGrew. Then I ducked my head, and the lights went down. 2 guns blazed in the dark. A woman screamed. The lights went up. 2 men lay stiff and stark. Pitched on his head and pumped full of lead was Dangerous Dan McGrew, and the man from the creek lay clutched to the breast of the lady that's known as Lou. These are the simple facts of the case, and I guess I ought to know. They say the stranger was crazed with hooch, and I ain't denying it so. I'm not as wise as these lawyer guys, but strictly between us two, the woman who kissed him and pinched his poke was the lady that's known as Lou.